my question today is, why is the world the way it is? And if you aren't scratching your head thinking that right now, with everything going on, then I wonder if you're paying attention. Now, in ancient times, before we had Chat GPT and Google search engines and things, when you had a question like that about why is the world the way it is, you would go find the smartest person around that you knew, and you would ask them, and they would often say to you, let me tell you a story. And the person would tell a story about why chickens can't fly, and why camels have humps, and all those different kinds of things. And so in the earlier service, which if you know is a lot more, we do a lot more of a traditional service at 10 o'clock. And I was talking about the Tower of Babel story. If you know that, it's from the Jewish Torah, the Jewish story, to answer that question. When people would say, how come if we all come from the same ancestors, we have so many different people that look different and act different and speak so many languages? And so that was the question. So really every tribe, every people all over the world has some story that explains that before Charles Darwin came along and explained to people who would listen that we evolved and came from the stars and all of that. Nevertheless, even though these stories no longer have to carry the weight for most of us of explaining the scientific basis for things like chickens and camels and ethnic diversity, they still contain some relevant ideas about how to live well and how to treat one another. For example, that story, the story of Babel, we could tell Tower of Babel, we could tell a number of different stories from different cultures, but it says that underneath all of our differences, all the diversity that's all around us, human beings are one family, one people. We come from the same source. There's really only ultimately one race, the human race. And we're all siblings with one another. And I think that's pretty cool because, right now with all the religious fanaticism and people trying to, stamp out diversity training and all this kind of stuff, to be able to say right there in the Bible, it's pretty clear. If you believe this is God's word, this is God's plan, that we're all supposed to be diverse, and that was how it was created. So I like to be able to point that out to some of the people who are making certain waves in our culture right now. But there's another important point of this story that I think is lost on certainly many Christians and those who read the Bible literally and think of it in a fundamentalist way. And that is that the story says that people's job is not to build a tower to heaven. If you know the story, it's about the people who are all trying to build a tower to get up to heaven, to be like gods, to be up as high as God, up into heaven, because they thought God was way up there. And so the story says, God's like, what are these people doing? They're wasting their lives building a stupid tower up into the sky. Is that what they think life is about? And so in the Bible story is that God mixed up all the languages, separated people so they didn't speak the same language, so they wouldn't waste their one precious life building towers up to heaven to try to find God up there somewhere. And so many religions focus that way on heaven above or God up there, and they come together to be focused up in the sky rather than right here among one another. And religions that often focus on heaven in the next life usually tell us that this world is not what's important, and even in many cases that this world is bad. That if you see trouble or have trouble in your life, don't worry, because all will be well in the next life. Now, wrapped up in this theology is the ideas that our bodies are somehow tainted and corrupt, and even our spirits and our thoughts are depraved with sin from the moment that we're born. Now, religions that focus on the next life, they tend to focus both on hope of heaven, but also on the fear of hell. These religions often conjure up these medieval images of a torturous, fiery dungeon to scare people into behaving a certain way. But a religion or a spirituality that focuses on this life doesn't fill people's heads with foreboding fears of hell in the next world, but instead concerns itself with the very real hells right here in this world that we can see with our own eyes, like hunger and poverty and neglect and abuse and addiction and discrimination. These real hells are what a community needs to put its attention and resources into, rather than spending time and effort terrorizing people with nightmarish notions of hell in the next life, when there are people living in hell right here in this life. And we ought to try to pull those people out of hell rather than trying to pull people out of some hell that most of us don't even believe in, and certainly nobody knows anything about it. So when we come together on Sunday here for a service like this, it's meant to be a springboard. We come here to be inspired, to be filled up, to be sent out into the world, to be builders and healers and uniters, to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, to house the homeless, to comfort the widows and the orphans. When our service ends in here, that's when our service begins out there. And that's how we do our part to help create heaven here on earth. Now, you may have heard the story about the man who dies and goes to heaven. And it is said that St. Peter has given him an introductory tour. And first they pass a room and they hear people singing and dancing and breaking plates. And St. Peter explains that those are the Greek Orthodox. And they go by another room and the people are chanting and they're laughing. And St. Peter says, well, those are the Buddhists. And they pass another doorway and they hear people and they're talking passionately. They're debating feverishly. And he says, well, those are the Jews. And then St. Peter says, shh. We need to be very quiet as we pass this next room. Why is that? Asked the man. And St. Peter explains, well, this room holds the Southern Baptists, and they still think they're the only ones up here. Now, of course, not to pick on the Southern Baptists, you can pick your fundamentalist religion of choice. Any religion that thinks that they're the only ones who have a lock on the truth, the only ones that God loves, the only ones that can make it to heaven, fill in the blank, and the joke still works. But you might be asking yourself, here in the point, in the humanist service that we have every week, why is it that we would even mention the term of heaven? But I think the point is that if we're talking about creating heaven here on earth, we kind of have to have an image of what is heaven. And I think most of us would agree that heaven would have to be a place where no one is hungry or hurt or hunted or haunted or harmed. A place where no one is lonely, left, lost, or lamenting. No one is robbed, raped, ransacked, ridiculed, run over, run off, or run down. A place where no one is denigrated, demeaned, disparaged, decried, or discriminated against. A place where people are truly united in a kinship of all humankind, regardless of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their skin pigmentation, their creed, their culture, their color, their class. A kinship with all life includes the plants and the animals. So any religious community that I would be a part of has to at least focus on creating that kind of world right here in this life. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of babble. I think babble's the religious word for baloney. And they're just building towers to nowhere, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I can imagine that some people who look at All Souls from the outside, they probably, they see how much we focus on justice and doing good works and loving our neighbors, that they might think we focus too much externally. They don't know what else we are doing together. But just because we love our neighbors doesn't mean that we don't love each other profoundly in this place. As a minister here, I've been fortunate to share great moments in people's lives. I've been right there in that little room we call the off-chancel room with men when they're about to get married, and the groom sweating in his tuxedo and fidgeting with his bow tie, and his brother's next to him, and his best friend from high school, and his uncle. And he's seconds away from a lifelong commitment that he's been thinking about on some level for his entire life. And we say a prayer of thanks in that precious moment. And I've also been there when a mother gave birth after the doctors told her that she would never be able to bear children. And I've been really blessed to stand up here with that family who brought that baby forward so that it could be welcomed and named before our community together, a community of love. And I've also been moved watching a daughter take a wet sponge and dampen her elderly mother's lips as her mother lies dying on a bed in the home where she grew up. There in that same home where the same mother many years earlier used to take a napkin and moisten it with her saliva and wipe the dried food off her daughter's cheek. And where the mother used to give her water and a warm hand on the back when she was a girl and was up all night with the flu. And I watched as the tears came streaming down the daughter's face when her mom finally slipped from time into eternity. And she found herself suddenly sitting in that house, feeling as alone as an orphan. You see, I've been there during incredible moments when a baby was born and survived only a few hours before dying in his father's arms. I've been in the hospital room praying with a wife and her children when there was an accident and her husband was in a coma for days, and they didn't know if he'd survive, and even if he did, if he'd ever know who they are again. And then I was blessed to be there to watch him wake up and regain his vitality and his memory and his strength and his life. I've been there to explain to a 9-year-old child that his young, healthy daddy who runs every day died suddenly while he was at school, and that he would never see him again alive. I've been called to come to an apartment building when a congregant had barricaded herself in the front office in the midst of a psychotic episode. And I was honored to be able to help her feel safe enough to go with the ambulance drivers to get the help that she needed. I've been humbled to be asked to be there for an adult son who had to tell his parents, who he loves with all of his heart, that he's gay. And he was trembling inside because he wasn't sure if they'd still love him in the same way. I've been with men and teenagers in jail when they had to deal with the stark consequences of their bad decisions and had lost their freedom for some chunk of their precious life. As a minister of this church for almost 25 years, I've been asked to be there when life is beautiful and when life is pretty tough. And I've been right here in this service when we've held a sacred silence after calling the names of some of these people like we did today, letting them know that they're held in our love and in our community. And so when we say that love is the spirit of this place, of this church, of this community, it's a courage-creating love, a hope-hearkening, sacrifice-stirring kind of love. A love that seeks to bind up the broken, a love that seeks to pour out an oil of gladness upon all the afflicted and all those who mourn. A love that begins at home, but doesn't even think about ending at the walls of this building. It's a love that doesn't sit satisfied with poverty and the poor state of public schools and hunger and homelessness and homicide. It's a love that takes seriously reality and history and mortality. And it's a love that can endure bitterness and despair without resorting to self-deception or self-defeat. If we try to build a tower to heaven, to try to deny our humanity, to deny our mortality, to deny the world's insanity, it may be tempting, but it's not living, and it's not honest, and it's not any kind of religious community that I would want to support. A spiritual community has a lot of responsibilities, but most importantly to me, I think, is helping to grow people's hearts. We might even say grow their souls. And that means learning to love, learning to say thank you, learning to trust and to be trustworthy, and learning to forgive when necessary and to say I'm sorry when appropriate. Now, I know that Roz came forward and she shared with us that it's in the stewardship time of our church and asking everybody to think about, what we can give in 2025 to support All Souls, and we need all the support we can get. It's going to be a big year for us, and so thank you for that. But before you even think about what you want to give to All Souls, I hope that you'll ask yourself, has my heart grown since I became a part of All Souls? Are you more open-hearted? Are you more generous with your money and your time and your talent? Have you suffered a loss and continued to expand and grow rather than contract? Are you living for something that you consider more important than only your self-interest? And I hope that it's the joy of this, as opposed to the fear of hell, is inspiring enough to get you to give what you can to help us make this a place for ourselves and our children and future generations to find a community like this. Because this is the world that I want to live in. And this is the world that I hope to be passing on to future generations. I think that in this moment in our history, with all the division and all the fights over what's real and what's true and all the disinformation, I think it's so easy to become cynical about our government, cynical about our fellow citizens and neighbors. I think that it's so easy to become negative and lose hope. And so to have a special community like this, a group of people where we can listen to music together, sing together, be together, hold each other through the highs and the lows of life is truly special and extraordinary. And it only happens because people like us care enough about ourselves and one another to make it happen. So thank you for all that you do. We couldn't do it without you. My wife and I are going to continue to increase, and we aim. I'll tell you my philosophy about giving to the church, since we're talking about it. And I don't like to talk about it much, so I do it this one little time a year, and then I know people don't want to hear about money all the time. So I often say that we give 5% of our income to the church, and I do that, and I try to give away another 5% to other causes that matter, the plate collection and other things going on in the world, arts and other things. So that I kind of have this philosophy that we take 90% of what we earn or get and keep it for ourselves and spend it on ourselves and live the best life that we can. And then we give 10% back to make the world a better place, a place that we hope to live in. And that's our contribution. I think it's a good balance. I think it's a good way to live. We don't expect everybody to give 10% to the church. But I hope that you'll consider giving 5% of your income or half or some big chunk of what you give away to help make this place a special place, because I believe it really does help make this world more livable, more lovable, and more real. So thank you so much. Let us do our part to create heaven right here on earth. Thanks.